Yeah.
Hi, I'm James Maguire, and today we're talking about privacy in the digital world. Sort of a hard thing to achieve given how talented today's online marketers are. They can find out pretty much anything about us they want to know. Sometimes we even help them. To discuss some of the challenges and issues, I'm joined by three experts. With me is Michelle Dennedy, formerly a Chief Privacy Officer at Cisco. Hello to you, Michelle.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, and I know you were also, you taught at Carnegie Mellon, you had the Identity Project, you've got a number of irons in the fire.
I do. So currently I'm helping privacy tech and privacy ops small companies through my advisory group. I was the CEO of an analytics company called Drumwave. I'm sitting on their advisory board now. So we're really interested in filling the gap of solutions in the privacy world. So I've taken my Sun and McAfee Intel and Oracle and Cisco experience and translating that into what are the problems that we can solve today, and then how do we architect into the future so that we can really be active business players, not just reducing risk, but really truly driving privacy as a driver of business.
Great. Also with us today is Ann Kavoukian, author of Privacy by Design. Hello to you, Ann.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, James.
And I know that you were also, you served 3 terms as the Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, correct?
I was the only one who could stick it out for 3 terms. And
you made it happen.
I have to tell you, if I reported to the Legislative Assembly, which consisted of all political parties, because if I had reported directly to the government, I would have been fired on day 2. Because there is so much, once the political party forms the government, everything changes. They want to be in control of information. They used to pay lip service to privacy. That went out the door. So it's something that concerns me enormously in terms of governments. I think sometimes there's too much emphasis on the private sector to the exclusion of government. We need to address both groups equally.
As you were talking, I think I heard the term Big Brother in there somewhere. I'm not sure. Am I exaggerating, or I don't know?
No, surveillance is growing dramatically. I call it surveillance creep. Tracking and surveillance of our activities is just abounding. And this morning I did a media interview with this guy in the UK who's telling me they're adding emotion now with facial recognitions on cameras in the UK. Are you kidding me? You're going to try to read my emotions? Like, that's going to be really accurate.
Right.
Oh God.
Right.
Facial recognition abounds with false positives. 81% of the times is a false positive. And you're going to add emotion to that? Give me a break. Just put it to bed. So yeah, unfortunately, Big Brother is getting bigger, it seems.
Rounding out our panel today is Myles Suer, Head of Global Marketing at Dell. Boomi. Hello to you, Myles.
Hello, thrilled to be here today. A lot of the wisdom I'll try and spout is from the CIOs that I work with in the CIO chat. And, I obviously have a column with you and others. And so I'll try and share some of the wisdom I'm learning. It's clear that privacy is now a big issue and people are thinking about it more seriously than they've had in the past.
So, all right, so let's talk about data privacy. Before we begin, I want to thank our viewers and listeners. Thank you so much for being with us. And I want to let you know, we really welcome your questions and your comments. There's a Q&A button down at the bottom of the screen. You know where it is because we've been all stuck at home all these months. Ask your question at any time. You don't need to wait until the end. So we welcome your comments. So, all right, data privacy. There's the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, legislation enacted by the EU. The question is, what percentage of firms have really made the changes to live up to the GDPR? And do we need a United States-based GDPR? Michelle, what is your sense of that?
Yeah, so 2 very different questions, right? So how many firms have really lived up to it? We actually studied this when I was still at Cisco, and the wonderful Harvey Jang and Robert Waitman have continued those studies, looking at people who feel like it's not a toggle, right? It's where are you from an ad hoc compliance to GDPR, to PIPEDA, to LGPD, to CCPA, the rest of the alphabet soup, from ad hoc when there's an emergency all the way to optimize, which is level 5. And what you find is, I think greater than 50% think they're probably a level 3. They know what to do. They might have a couple policies. Has it cascaded throughout the tech stack? no way, Jose. But there's at least a plan, and in many cases, an executive who is accountable. So that's question one, is how many have done it? And doing it is also running along a moving train. We're changing what it is. You know, the Privacy Shield, of course, was just vitiated a couple weeks ago. So compliance with the overseas transfer of information under GDPR and other schemas, the game has changed again.
Wait, what happened a couple weeks ago? I may have missed this. Please enlighten me.
Okay, so there's a young man named Max Schrems who dropped out of school to sue Facebook, and he's been doing it very successfully for a while. And basically what he said was, because the US government has so much of an intrusive influence and capability to look into data streams from Facebook and some of the other giants, there cannot be a way for Facebook to legally provide adequate protection of European data in the US. And just a few weeks ago, the Court of Justice agreed and said, so that's how Safe Harbor, which was the Commerce Department agreeing with the EEA, how they would kind of treatyize this. And if you agree to submit yourself to the FTC jurisdiction in the US, which not every company is capable of doing legally, you know, the banks, for example, are not bound by the FTC, you could avail yourself of this treaty between these economic areas, and you could have an agreement that you would be held to basically European standards as a US or international company. Now, that went down in 2015, 2016, and there was a renegotiation from Safe Harbor to Privacy Shield. Again, this agreement, and this is very much misunderstood for many operational folks, it only ever covered the US and the European economic areas. It never covered places like India. So I continually get questions from clients saying, hey, you know, we're sending information from Europe to India. You know, what impact does the Privacy Shield have on that? Absolutely nothing. So it's a complex world, and your privacy provider is asked to catch up to all of these developments. And at the same time, remember, what we're being asked to attest to and govern is like liquid. We're talking about IT systems that are constantly being changed and updated. And then now, in the land of pandemic and work from home, COVIDville, your data centers are almost, I'm not going to say irrelevant, but the game has changed. The locus of private information and sensitive information has exploded into every home of every home worker. And so you've got to make sure that all those protections are in place. So I'll briefly touch on your second part of the question, which is, does the US need and I'll put the air quotes up, for a GDPR-like law? Now that the UK is no longer in the European Union, we're talking all civil law countries. So having a civil law schema in a common law jurisdiction is not really appropriate. We need a hybrid that has the same or higher protections as a GDPR, LGPD, or PIPEDA Canadian rule, but we need to make sure that we're fitting it into a common law and quite litigious society. And so that's been, you know, kind of the debates on the legal side, particularly when you look at these ballot propositions, which sound really pretty to consumers. You know, in California, you can have your data. Well, that's just great, but there's really not the same mechanism built into the data, not into the legal and corporate schema. And we're certainly not seeing what my big battle cry has been, is you want to see former CPOs, former privacy commissioners and lawyers sitting on the boards of public companies. If you don't even ask the right question about compliance, you will never get to the next level where we're actually preserving and promoting respect for data about people, which is my definition for privacy.
So certainly there are gaps there in terms of, you know, data privacy. Myles, I'd like to draw on some of your expertise with CIOs. You know, what can CIOs and enterprise architects do to close some of these gaps? And I sense maybe the gaps are getting bigger even as we speak. But is there a solution there? What are the biggest gaps they need to solve?
Well, obviously they need the support of the board and CEO and maybe even the chief marketing officer. But, you know, they realize that there's a problem here. It's been interesting to me that some of the people who are the most on GDPR in the US have been universities have been saying, yeah, this is exactly what we've been working on. This just codifies it. And oh, by the way, they had to worry about it because so many of their students were international. But with that said, I think there's a belief now for the first time that privacy needs to be architected into data. We actually need to think about who can see this data. But on the other hand, I've seen, my friends at Adobe talk about Uber, data repositories so that they can do predictive model on customers. If it's not designed with GDPR and privacy by design, I don't think it has a chance. And I asked CIOs recently this, and they said, you have to architect it from the beginning. Just accepting somebody's marketing, Uber situation is not going to work.
Mm-hmm. And what would you add in terms of the big gaps that CIOs and enterprise architects or related staff can solve there? Is there an answer to that?
Well, the big issue is governance, but I'm going to let Ann jump in here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, of course, this is so obvious. You have to be proactive and bake the privacy protective provisions into your design. It's absolutely essential. You have to bake it into your code, and it has to be a model of prevention. You can't leave it for afterwards. So hopefully you've met the privacy laws, GDPR, or whatever. It's too little too late. When I created Privacy by Design, like 20 years ago, it took some doing because most chief privacy officers and commissioners were lawyers. And so introducing a model of prevention was a completely new model, and it took some doing. But then in 2010, Privacy by Design was unanimously passed as an international standard by the International Assembly of Privacy Commissioners and Data Protection Authorities. And they did this. I talked to them afterwards and I thanked them for unanimously doing this, but I was surprised. And they said, look, in this day and age of social media, everything exchanges online abounding, there's no way we can address protecting privacy by regulatory means after the fact. And so when I talked to CIOs and others, and as you know, in 2018, when the GDPR came into effect, Privacy by Design has been included in the GDPR, and privacy as the default, which is the second of 7 foundational principles of Privacy by Design. So this is what I ask CIOs and others to look at, is you have to embed these protections into your operations, into the design. And privacy as the default is the strongest principle because it says, look, don't rely on the individual to have to search through all the legalese in the terms of service and the privacy policy, which takes hours, to find the opt-out box that says, do not use my information for any purpose other than the intended primary purpose of the data collection, which I've consented to. No one does that. Life is short, but it doesn't mean that people don't care deeply about privacy. Privacy has been, concern for privacy, at an all-time high for the past 2 years. It comes in regularly in the 90 percentile in public opinion polls like Pew Research. 90% are very concerned. 92% are concerned about the lack of control over their personal information. Privacy by default flips that on its head, and it says to users, customers, you don't have to worry about asking for your privacy to be protected. We give it to you automatically. It's the default setting. We can only use your personal information for the primary purpose consented to. Beyond that, if there's a secondary use, we have to come back to you and seek your positive consent for that. This is a game changer. And companies that have become certified for Privacy by Design have come back to me and said, this builds loyalty like no other. It's just a game changer. When we do go back to customers for secondary uses of additional data, they always say yes, because we've built trust. There's a trusted business relationship that's been developed. And that's huge because right now there is such a trust deficit with virtually all companies and governments. So if you can reverse that, build trust, then and embed privacy into your operations, then you're way ahead of the other guys. You gain a competitive advantage. So to CIOs, that's what I lead with in terms of things that they need to do.
So two adds to what Ann said. So the first thing, it was amazing. I heard the CIO of Target talk a year and a half ago. And one of the things he said is, if we ever have a breach comparable to what we had, we will be out of business. So the monetary thing is there. The complexity here is, I'm going to go back to governance. Governance is how you codify what Ann's talking about. The issue we've got is that we've built system after system in stovepipes, and so we've connected them all. So this data is not just in a single system, it's flowing across all of these things. So if you don't architect and govern the data consistently across all of its touch points, then you have a failure, because even though you may have the right policy, it's not being instantiated.
Mm-hmm.